And welcome in. We are back for season 2. This is episode 1, season 2. We're starting earlier this year. Last year we did not do team or league previews. This is the Fantasy Football Forum, and I'm joined for the inaugural season 2 episode with co-host Grant, coming from the West Coast, living the casual life out there. Grant, how is it going out where you're at?
Things are good, Jeff. Just excited to get into football, and with the upcoming season, a lot of changes with free agency and the draft that happened a few months ago. So just excited to start talking football again, getting only a couple months away from the season starting.
Yeah, and being the off season, you know what season that is for football. It's time for lying season to come, and every story that we hear to grasp our attention, and we get to make, we have to filter through what is actually true or what is fabricated or just there for us to enjoy reading. So that's the fun as football fans and fantasy football players. So this week, so today let's go through. We are going to do the AFC and NFC North, do a preview of each team in those divisions. So Grant, I've listed out here some of what we kind of think, and I know we don't have a crystal ball here, so we can't see the future, but kind of how we see the division going. And this division typically is one that when you think, we'll start in the AFC, when you think the AFC North, it gets cold in late October, November, December. It's very run centered, heavy defense, all that gridiron that we come to love and watching football. But I been looking at this, and I think we might be in for a shock this year, where the AFC North may be an arms race. It looks like to be a division built that they want to score points. They want to have fast-paced play, but also with good defense. And as we've seen in the NFL the past few years, a good defense does not necessarily mean it'll stop an offense in this NFL that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So
Definitely agree with you there, and I think that I think with the AFC North, like you mentioned, in the past, it has been more of a defensive battle, but there's been some quarterback changes, and also to
yep.
Cincinnati, who has typically not done as hot the last 10 years. The divisional, with the exception of a few of those Andy Dalton years, now is kind of seen as the challenger to the Chiefs
Yep.
and the Bills in the AFC, and so that adds a new wrinkle along with some changes that we'll talk about with the other teams.
Right. So the goal with this, as we break this down, so you have to keep me honest, is as I kind of break down a few highlight players, we want to make sure we're doing that the same way across the board. So if there's a way that we're looking at players one way, but we then take a different argument for a different player, go ahead and call us out on that, because that's not how you accurately go about trying to rank or really look at what an upcoming season for fantasy football will be. So as I see this division, realistically, it's still going to be a tough division. And if I'm honest, we still should probably see Cincinnati leading the way like they did for the past 2 years. They haven't lost Burrow. They haven't lost Chase. T. Higgins is still there. They've made improvements to the offensive line. All the right things that they need to do to stay ahead in this division, and honestly to stay in the top tier of the AFC, which, again, you're trying to keep up with Kansas City, trying to keep up with Buffalo, trying to keep the surging Jacksonville team, trying to stay ahead of them as well. But also, if we're looking at realistic standings, I think teams that could vie for it also could potentially either win it or come in second behind them is Baltimore. I see them having a good year. They re-signed Lamar Jackson. They signed Odell Beckham. Baltimore's typically also known for a tough defense and a very heavy run game. We're going to get a little more in depth on each of these teams as we go along here. Cleveland also And they made the QB change last year with Deshaun Watson. They spent a lot of capital on that. So they're obviously looking to also be an offensive juggernaut within this division and the AFC. But you also can't rule out Pittsburgh, where they didn't add too many offensive weapons, but they bolstered the line. And their defense has always been solid. Last year, they were not supposed to do very well, but they still finished the year at 9-8. So realistically, you could, at the end of the season, be looking at Cincinnati, then Baltimore, Cleveland, then Pittsburgh. And I know that puts Pittsburgh in the last place, but it could be a still drop dead, drag out, division, but still a very fun shootout division to watch. But if things fall right, we want to call bull call standings. Very bold call. You could see Pittsburgh, because they are the way they are. Mike Tomlin has that organization run very well. We could see Pittsburgh running away with this, or not necessarily running away, but taking this division this year. They weren't supposed to do anything last year, and they surprised a lot of teams down the stretch. Again, they're known for their defense and bolstering that line. You could see Baltimore still jumping up. If they stay healthy this year, they also could win the division, which then would put Cincinnati, where they've had some luck with the way Burrow plays with Chase. Last year, they had a slow start, and we don't like to think about the slow start they had last year. They finished strong, but if they have another slow start, that could hurt them in the division as well. And poor Cleveland, they have that. I want to see them do well, and I think they can. But again, did they make the right moves? Will we see Deshaun Watson, the one that we have seen from Houston in the past, or is the sample of 6 games that we had last year going to be it? And if it is, you could theoretically see them falling to the bottom of the league or bottom of the division here in the AFC North. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. Any thoughts on this division before we go team by team?
No, I think you hit all the high points. I mean, I think that there has been a lot of volatility. I think some of that got resolved with both Deshaun Watson a couple of years ago, but then he was suspended. And then now with Lamar Jackson finally getting his extension with the Ravens that he wanted with his guaranteed money. So I think now all the quarterbacks, I say the Steelers would probably arguably be like the most the biggest question mark with Kenny Pickett. Something happens with him,
Right.
if he struggles early. But I still see the Steelers with Mike Tomlin believing in Kenny Pickett. So it is a division that there is a lot of certainty with quarterback, I think, for the most part. It's just a matter of, will these quarterbacks live up to both their paychecks, right? So
Right.
there's a lot of money involved with these quarterbacks. So in theory, that's going to help fantasy-wise understand the players' value, right? Because that's one variable you're taking away, is a quarterback who's all over the place and able to hopefully get targets to people and allow his team to go up and down the field.
Yep. Well, we're going to take this division and we're going to do the standings from last year. So we're going to go from last to first. And of course, the Cleveland Browns did finish last place in the division last year. So that's a place that unfortunately most Browns fans have seen a while, and very sad, but they are hoping to turn things around. Some of the highlights of free agents lost, moving on from the Browns this year, is there's 2 notable for fantasy football wise. They no longer have running back Kareem Hunt, who was the 1B to Nick Chubb, and backup quarterback, but also who was a very serviceable and played very well quarterback Jacoby Brissett, is also no longer on the team. Both these losses in the team actually, to me, says they believe that much more in Deshaun Watson and what he is able to do, not just believing what he did last year is all he's able to do now, but also in Nick Chubb, that he can handle potentially more of a load, or the backup running backs in there, whether it's Jerome Ford or another one, where they can handle more of a load and be that 1B that Kareem Hunt was, that they don't need that 2-headed running game. And also, fantasy-wise, for free agents that they added, they actually traded for former Jets, wide receiver Elijah Moore. To me, this indicates a potential signaling that with Elijah Moore, with Donovan Peoples-Jones, Amari Cooper, and then still having the tight end David Njoku, and then some of the young wide receivers they've drafted, I think this team wants to be more pass heavy. The head coach group certainly hasn't really been that way since they've been there. But this tells me that there's a potential where this could be a very pass heavy team, which is certainly not something we've seen from him in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think that this, I think the Browns' fantasy output is going to depend entirely upon how Deshaun Watson performs. It's going to be
Yep.
entirely up to him because, especially now with losing Kareem Hunt, you do have Nick Chubb, an awesome running back, but now he's going to have to become more of a three-down back unless there's a new scheme that Cleveland puts in that changes how they utilize both these guys. So it's getting more predictable. They're going to know what to expect from Nick Chubb. They're going to know, I would think opposing defenses are going to be able to see him a little more clearly. So
Right.
Deshaun Watson, it really, the pressure's on his shoulders to do some of those read options, to make some of those plays and decisions that we've seen from him with the Texans that led him to this contract that he got with the Browns. And so, you know, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but I think some of the Browns players could be sleeper picks if everyone, obviously the last 6 games with Deshaun Watson, he's not gonna. I don't think his ADP is gonna really creep into the 5th round, honestly, for most leagues. So you could sneak in some value with Amari Cooper. I could see Donald Peoples-Jones, which you mentioned last year quite a bit as a flyer on the waiver wire as being a good little pickup. So I agree with you though what you said. I think it's going to depend on Deshaun Watson, and I honestly don't know what to expect from him this year. That's the beauty of football, right? But we have the small size from last year, and then he's now has a whole offseason to practice and stuff with the team. I have no clue how Deshaun Watson and honestly any Browns players are going to do with fantasy. It's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, and I think that's where fantasy football is about taking some risks sometimes, and you have to know what are the risks that you want to take. And I think Cleveland's one of those teams where it could be a small sample trap where I can make the argument between players that we saw last year have 6 games that went absolutely bananas. They were fantastic. They did great. So therefore they should do great this year. And if that's the case, that would mean Deshaun Watson also then would struggle because that's what we saw from him last year. Not to mention that he was a year removed from playing. He was serving his suspension for off the field issues, which you don't have to like the guy for what he did. This is purely just talking football wise, what he can do. So, especially where he's going, if you're the type of player that believes he will produce at a high quarterback level that you saw early on in his career, that he's going as very much a sleeper pick. Because right now, and this is off of ADP data, that's 12 team. All of our ADP data is on 12 team PPR. In a single quarterback league, he is going as pick at the 7-10. So round 7, pick 10 in a 12 team league, and he is going as quarterback 8. So you're getting past all the high profile quarterbacks. You're getting past the Mahomes. It's kind of that second or third tier, depending on how many tiers you want to have, of potential high level. But at that point, if you really want to take a shot, he could be that late or mid round flyer and quarterback that you say, I'm going to potentially get a lot because that's what the team is putting around them. Another guy that I would be higher right now, Nick Chubb, is going as RB7 in a 12-team league. He's going in the middle of the 2nd round, behind the real big guys typically, but I think there's some guys right behind him. There's a few surprises that are above him, but he is going behind guys like Tony Pollard, Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, going behind the rookie Bijan Robinson. And depending on how you want to build your team, I think Chubb is a pretty early candidate to say he could have a 2,000-yard season if he's the one that's the main focus of the backfield with losing Kareem Hunt. We've not really seen him totally unlocked. Chubb's been that guy where you draft him early on and he doesn't get a lot of pass work. He gets some rushing work and he's good for about 1,200 yards and maybe 10 to 12 touchdowns. And you just kind of set it, and that's where he's at. But this could be the year he's kind of unlocked as a rusher, depending on how the season goes for the Browns as a whole.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you there. I think that Nick Chubb, I think, like I said, I think it depends upon where you're sitting in the draft, but I definitely think with Deshaun Watson having a full off season, I like Nick Chubb, especially in leagues where running backs are being drafted later. I do like where Nick Chubb is sitting, and I would pick him if I had that pick.
Yeah, he's definitely one where you could take a wide receiver early. So if you had a mid-round, you could take a wide receiver that's a pretty high end and then feel comfortable taking that as your RB1.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, for sure.
We mentioned the wide receiver they traded for from the Jets is wide receiver Elijah Moore. Thoughts on Moore coming into this season? Don't know if you had too many thoughts on him as a Jet. I know he was considered one of those huge talents, but he obviously had some issues with the coaching staff with the Jets, and they've then parted ways. So was that the cause for some of his lack of production? Was it just he wasn't ready? And thoughts on him going into the season?
Yeah, so with Elijah Moore, it is hard because between, first off, their instability at quarterback and all the drama related to the quarterbacks with the Jets last year, and then the coaching staff, it was hard to see what his on the field talent would be with a normal workload, with a stable work environment, so to speak, right? Honestly, I like him with the Browns just because I feel like Amari Cooper's, I think, unless something crazy happens, so maybe that wide receiver one we're going to see, Donovan Peoples-Jones could be some, like, for fantasy purposes, kind of more of a flyer flex. I could
Right.
see Elijah Moore sneaking in and actually posting like top 20 wide receiver numbers. I know his ADP is going a little lower, but I could see him developing chemistry with an established quarterback rather than, you know, the myriad of options he was getting from Zach Wilson, others last year with the
Right.
Jets, and having the instability, having a quarterback who's been around the block, a veteran who can work with guys. I could see Elijah Moore being a good value pick if you can get him late. He's going, I think, 8th or ninth round in most projections that I'm seeing right now with an ADP. So I think there is some value there. He could sneak in and be a good receiver for your team.
Yeah. So I think it depends really how they use him, because if he's used mainly as a slot, then I think there's a lot of value there where you could have Amari Cooper lining up in his typical X role with you take Donovan Peoples-Jones playing that Z flyer role. And if Moore plays majority out of slot, which I think that's out of college, he did a lot of that, but I know he's more versatile than just being a slot receiver. So depending on how they have him used in, if he's out there in 2 receiver sets or maybe he's out there in 3 receiver set. Currently, he is going as wide receiver 44. And average early 9th round between the 9.4 and 9.6. Where I'm a little probably lower on him, I'd like to see it first. And that's where
Yeah,
I'm a
for
little
sure.
more. And in that range, I would actually take a guy that's going average wise in the 9.7. I'll take Rashad Bateman over him, because that to me it's another guess, but I'm potentially getting the first or second wide receiver for the Ravens versus the third one in Cleveland. And if this division truly is an arms race and it's really that high flying, then having a third wide receiver as a flex flyer is pretty good. But I think I'd hedge my bets on
Mm-hmm.
some of the upside versus taking more there. Obviously, he wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
kill your league or your season if you took him and he didn't
Mm-hmm.
pan out. But I think there's better value and upside there versus
I agree.
taking him
Yeah.
where he's at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what you mentioned is like the fair, probably reasonable approach. Looking at his talent, it's also hard to understand. Like you mentioned, he's had the volatile season last year. Is it actually him, right? Is him as a person, like, is he inviting this kind of drama? Is he creating the chaos in the first place? Or is it the coaching staff? Is it all the things that he was saying was that the fault? So
Yep.
that's something that we'll figure out this year. If it truly was another coaching staff, I'm hoping Sean Watson, we'll see what kind of chemistry they put together. But yeah, I think that what you're saying is accurate. Wait a few rounds. If I had to guess, it is pretty late. Most people have their wide receivers and running backs picked by that point. You're starting to look at some other flyers. So, maybe you kind of put them on your bench, see what happens for a few weeks, and then start to see some trends, start seeing some receptions and attempts going his way, and then slide him into your flex or something like that.
Yeah. And we can get on a different episode thoughts about how we like to draft, what our thoughts and strategies are. But especially when we get into later rounds, I try to shoot for the upside picks versus the floor. And he may have that upside, but I think there are others around him that may have more. So, but
Mm-hmm.
anyway, moving on in the division, in third place last year. So again, outdoing what a lot of people thought they might. Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's had they've not had a quiet off season, but they have had a quieter off season for this division. Really, they didn't have any players go away, fantasy relevant players anyway. They kind of kept everybody there. Najee's
Mm-hmm.
still there. Jalen Warren's backing him up. Kenny Pickett's the big question mark for Pittsburgh here. How does he do at 0-2?
Mm-hmm.
Um, they did add Allen Robinson from the Rams, and I think the Rams kind
Mm-hmm.
of did what they could to part ways with Allen Robinson. So we'll see how that is if you really buy that Allen Robinson is, still has something of value there, or is he just done? He's, old enough for NFL terms that he's more done. George Pickens is heading into his
Mm-hmm.
second year, and we have Deontay Johnson. The key that I think Pittsburgh has that a lot of people in the fantasy community are potentially missing is they did a lot of work to bolster their offensive line. Last year, I think they had the worst graded offensive line in football, which that really hurt them. And I think you saw that with the play. Kenny Pickett was
Mm-hmm.
just forced to get rid of the ball fast. That led to not a lot of deep plays for Pickens, but at the same time, Pittsburgh started playing at a level down the stretch of the season where it was really a story of two halves of the season. It was the first half, which was not really good, and then second half, and that was when Pickett really started coming
Mm-hmm.
on his own. So we're gonna see. Does he take that step forward? Does he have a better second year? I mean, we've seen quarterbacks not do well their
Mm-hmm.
first rookie year, but come in and do a lot better the second year, continue on that. So is Kenny Pickett that one where he has the
Mm-hmm.
ability to take this team to the next level?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because I think with Kenny Pickett, we obviously we saw the struggles, right? We saw him. We kind of saw Pittsburgh through the miracle of Mike Tomlin, what he's able to do with the team, right? Like his streak of 500 seasons lives on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think the question is I don't know about real football record. I think the Steelers, maybe go like 10-7. I could see them with their signings giving Kenny Pickett some more time. Hopefully he's able to develop a little more as a quarterback this year. We see some more accurate throws, which is a big problem for him, was getting rushed out of the pocket under pressure, new quarterback, lots of tipped balls, lots of intercepted balls, lots of just hurried, rushed passes that we saw several overthrown, wide open throws to receivers last year that cost a lot of fantasy owners points, especially with Deontay Johnson and others. So, I guess one thing I want to ask you is how are you seeing Allen Robinson kind of fit in with the draft? Because he's with the Bears on a hype Trubisky team that did not meet expectations, then goes to the Rams, kind of gets thrown around a little bit at the Rams, and now he's here in Pittsburgh. So where do you see him kind of fall in ADP, and where would you rank him in terms of being a flyer or maybe more of like a flex, things like that?
I think he's probably a flyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, that's kind of, I'll let Allen Robinson beat me if he's going to do that. I think what we saw with the Rams and his play there, I think that's speaking more to what his career is now. We all want to remember Allen Robinson and he's got 1,000-yard receiving career, or, he's had those years with poor quarterback play. So he's been plagued, behind playing with Blake Bortles with Jacksonville, then going to Chicago and playing with Mitch Trubisky. And then,
Mm-hmm.
last year was, he was supposed to have the best quarterback play, and that all fell apart with the Rams. And so at this time, I think he's more out there to be just that. He's another guy out there. I think he could actually get beat out by either second-year wide receivers or rookie wide receivers that they have, because they have and I'm blanking on the name now, but they do have a second-year wide receiver that they drafted last year that I think could come out and really give a run for the money to be on, in 3 wide receiver sets with Johnson and Pickens. So Calvin Austin, that's the name of the receiver. It's Calvin Austin. I think Calvin
Mm-hmm.
Austin could come out and surprise a few people here. So obviously, I think we're going to hear a lot of hype as the summer goes on with training camp, with, NFL's finishing up OTAs, or they have finished up OTAs. So that's everybody's running around in shorts, and there's not really much defense. So everybody looks fantastic right now, and everybody's going to make plays. So now's the time we're going to see people, players do well. They're all going to look good. That's
Mm-hmm.
where you have to start. I think a lot of news coming from him is going to be more noise. So he's one where I'm avoiding, and if I'm wrong, I'm just going to say I was wrong. And that's fine. I 1 year of having that, I'll buy it. 2 years, and I'm not going to buy it after what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, so overall, do you feel like with the Steelers, I mean, are there any players that you're really excited about with the Steelers that you're reaching for? The potential's there because obviously with like Deshaun Watson, we talked about with the Browns, like maybe you don't overreach, but you could see like it is a feast or famine situation. Like it could be great, it could be bad, we don't know. Do you feel that with any of the players here with the Steelers? Are there any players that you'd maybe reach for based on their potential, or are you kind of down on them right now?
Well, so I'm actually very excited about most Steeler players. I think we're not going to see, so like the one I'm most excited about is Deontay Johnson. Last year he led the team in targets, and I think he's going to lead the team in targets again. So Johnson's also the clearest form of touchdown regression in a positive way this year, where last year he finished with 0 touchdowns in the whole
Mm-hmm.
season. I
Mm-hmm.
think I read a stat where if he had finished with maybe 3 touchdowns, he would have been a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. So that just shows
Hmm.
the volume of receptions and yards that he had still puts him up there to be a wide receiver 1. And right now he's going in the 6th round in most single quarterback 12-team drafts. He's going after guys like Drake London. He's going after Michael Pittman. He's going after guys where The offenses I'm not as excited about, but
Yeah.
I'm more buying into what Pittsburgh is doing. Again, they built the offensive line. They've doing the things that they need to make the team better. And so I'm excited mostly for him. I think most of Pittsburgh players, you're getting a discount because of what happened last year. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you see that also with Najee, where last year he was going most drafts he went the end of the first round, and it was late in August. Then it came out he had a Liz Frank injury. He did not do so hot the first half of the year, but second half, I think he was RB8 in the second half of the
Mm.
season, which I know we're not, again, small sample size. We can't fall into that trap of, well, he was RB8. We also have seen him have success. Now, he won't be the player where it's Big Ben throwing, 30 dump offs to his running back in a game. He won't have that type of season, but I think he's more the clear lead back. And, yes, Jalen Warren can come in, spell him for a bit, but I think the gap is a lot further between Harris and Warren than what we're going to say it is over the summer. So I think that may suppress his value a little bit as well. But I think there's opportunity for most Pittsburgh players to outperform their ADP.
Mm. Sounded to me like we talked about the Browns and the Steelers so far. Sounded to me it's almost like the tale of two different sides of a coin with the AFC North. You have the Browns and the Steelers with didn't have great quarterback play last year. People, based are remembering the last thing from the last season. So, and then you had the other teams, right? You had the Bengals and the Ravens. Ravens, flashy Lamar, slinging the ball around, running like crazy. Obviously the Bengals, Joe Burrow, and just like the points monster that they were. I mean, they,
Mm-hmm.
you know, took the Chiefs all the way to the end of the AFC Championship game, all this stuff. So I think overall, like you got almost the two different sides of a coin with the AFC North here, right? Like you got teams, these two teams we just talked about, where if you're trying to find players at a deal or at a discount, these teams would be good to start with because might get passed up by other managers looking to score like a hot offense or something like that. You can sneak in,
Right.
get some value at a good spot, and as they kind of steal good players that people are just remembering like, oh, well, this team went 9-8, and then wherever the Browns went, it was some losing record there. But yeah, it's not. It's kind of just to think about is that
Yep.
oftentimes you have to look at the individual and their performance rather than the team. Even though team is a good indicator of individuals' performance with an offense, it's not always the case.
Yeah, and I think that's especially later in drafts. I think that you hit on it really well. Where something where I look
Mm-hmm.
at is you look at player, but then you are also looking at team. So if you take, we just talked about Deontay Johnson, where if he's going after guys
Mm-hmm.
like Drake London, London and the Falcons, they could potentially be the lowest pass volume team. And while
Mm-hmm.
London leads that
Yep.
team as their wide receiver one, in whether you want to say it's London or if you want to call Kyle Pitts that one, I would rather take a potential on, we've seen Pittsburgh be maybe they're not Kansas City. They're not blowing the doors off offensively. They're also not last in the league in what they do offensively. They're kind of middle of the road. I'll take a chance on a guy to bounce back in an offense like that, and I'll take that opportunity at a discount because then
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yep.
that's where you find the value if you're mining value in fantasy football drafts. Now, again, this if Johnson's ADP gets out of control, last year I think it was Michael Pittman. He was a fifth round. He jumped all the way to the second round, and at that time, then he loses value where he's no longer that value. So any of these players,
Mm-hmm.
and again, this is late June. So late June, Johnson's a value going around, in round 6. If he gets up to the third round, is he's at same value? And I would say absolutely not. But
Mm-hmm.
again, we don't know what's going to happen. So it's all about where's the value. And has a player overshot that value. So I think that's the big key to take
Mm,
away of all of this, where I agree where this is something to look at, but then to make sure you're not just, getting thought on I need to get this player because this is a player that has huge value when the value is actually not there because they've jumped the shark. So
mm, yeah, good point.
anyway, moving right along the AFC North, as you mentioned it, Baltimore Ravens. And Ravens actually surprised, I think, some because they dealt with injuries to Lamar Jackson. They virtually had no passing game by the time the
Mm,
season ended. They were very much just a run focused, just run heavy team. Dealt with injuries at the running back position all year long. Very, they kind of overplayed what they were able, like what they had as far as player wise, because they went to the playoffs, they lost to the Bengals, but they were led by Tyler Huntley, but they took the Bengals pretty much down to the wire last year. So the biggest story I actually think coming from Bengals camp this offseason is they got rid of former head offensive coordinator Greg Roman, who was very run heavy, and they replaced him with Todd Monken, who was with Georgia.
mm-hmm.
So many think that the Ravens are going to go from a run first approach that turns into more of a pass friendly
Mm-hmm.
offense. Thoughts on offensive coordinator changes in Baltimore?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, watched quite a bit of Todd Monken games. He was in the OC for Oklahoma State for a while, so
Okay.
definitely watched a lot of his games. He definitely very pass heavy, and I think based on their free agent acquisitions and the first round selection of Zay Flowers,
Ah,
I think that Todd was talking with Lamar, and I think they are definitely trying to do more run heavy for two reasons. One, I think they think the team's going to score more points that way. Also, two, I think they know with Lamar they're trying to ease him out of this run first approach that we've seen quarterbacks like RG3 and others not do so well at, and they want to keep this contract that they have with him in place
yep.
going, and also too like he's a good quarterback, and they don't want him to be getting banged up all game. So I do think they're going to be more pass heavy. I think you're going to see. My thought is you are going to see Mark Andrews be crazy good. He's going to put up, I think, some insane numbers, and I think it's going to be my kind of like hot take or whatever it's going to be. It's going to be almost like a step below Kelsey in terms of production. Usually Kelsey's way up and above everybody else. I think you're going to see a lot more Mark Andrews. It's going to be good. So
So
I am. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
does Mark Andrews outscore Travis Kelsey this year?
I don't think so. I think the way
Okay.
that Travis Kelsey has the it factor
And
that I don't think other tight ends can replicate, and we've seen that the last 5 years, right? Like it just he does
yep.
stuff that other quarterbacks can't. And I know obviously we're both Chiefs fans, so I try not to see the bias with things. But he's been tight end one the last 4 years, right? So that's it's
Right.
just one of those things that but I do think though Mark Andrews plays a huge part of the offense. He's coming back from some injuries last year, so I'm excited to see what the Ravens do. I think that Lamar's going to be throwing the ball a lot more, and I think they need to do that to compete with KC, Buffalo, and Cincinnati.
Yep. I think that's what they're trying to do is contend with those three. And we mentioned they only lost the backup tight end Josh Oliver off the offense.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned, the acquisitions they had bringing in. They brought in obviously Odell Beckham, and they signed Nelson Aguilar, but I think it's just for wide receiver depth at that point in time. Rashad Bateman's coming back off his injury from last year, and then like you said, they drafted Zay Flowers in the first round of the draft.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing to remember with Lamar, and I think we forget this because he is such a run heavy or he has been such a run heavy quarterback is even going back to his days in Louisville. Every year that he played, he progressively has gotten better as a passer, where he
Mm-hmm.
did not start out as a prolific passer. He's not necessarily known for that, but he has gotten better at that aspect of his game. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something that we forget about. And we could be looking up halfway through the season and Lamar Jackson's leading the way in passing yards for the NFL. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities. And that's where if this team is going to surprise people, that's going to be what it does. Is it's going to be behind Lamar Jackson. It's going to be behind a balanced run game behind J.K. Dobbins, who's a year now away from, or now 2 years. This is his second year away from his ACL and MCL tear that he had suffered 2 years
Yep.
ago. And he was not right all year last year. He didn't really start coming on till the end of last year. Speaking of ACLs, will we see the old Odell Beckham that we saw with the Rams in the Super Bowl, or is this going to be kind of the start of the downfall? Did he kind of see his biggest playing time kind of now? He's not the same person. Which Odell Beckham do we see?
Hmm. Interesting question. I do think that Odell has peaked with his career. I do think he's on kind of the downhill slope a little bit on his trajectory. I would love to see him and Lamar connect and really build that chemistry this year, but I think that just, based upon how the end of New York went and kind of honestly since the end of the Giants and just through the Rams and everything else that's been going on, like he's had moments. Obviously, the Super Bowl was a big one, but 2 years ago. But um, overall, it's really hard to know. I mean, I think that kind of what you mentioned, maybe he's like a wide receiver three on the team behind, like like maybe Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers are, one and two along with Rashad Bateman somewhere in the mix there. Like maybe it's like Zay Flowers ends up kind of being the wide receiver three there, and then along with Odell, I don't know. I just don't really see Odell making the kind of impact we're used to seeing his name carry and his legacy carry in previous years. So, I think most drafts are taking him 10 plus, right, in terms of where he is going in the draft. I value, I'm sure, will move up and down before August, but that's probably where he's going to end up.
Yeah, and I think I like right now he's currently wide receiver 51. So again, late June, you've seen a lot of fantasy football players who do this all year round drafting. So they kind of a little more savvy than most casual leagues as casual leagues pick up starting late July into August.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, he'd be the guy I would say kind of jumps in ADP, partially because of name value, and then the last thing we remember is
Mm-hmm.
his performance in the Super Bowl with the Rams 2 years ago. What we forget is his performance the years he had with the Browns, where he's supposed to do all of these things, and every year he's
Yep.
disappointing managers who
Yeah.
drafted him.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, and it was really like his last year with the Giants. All of the Browns, like since the last year of the Giants, like I mentioned, it's kind of it got to like that second to last year with the Giants, and it's just been down since then.
yep.
So it's really tough. I mean, I'd love to see him do well. He's an amazing player with tons of talent. I just think that you know age unfortunately is a nasty thing, and I also do think just the way the schemes were with the Browns and the Rams, he wasn't doing great with those. So I don't know if Todd Monken can you know utilize him the way he has been. I don't think he can, but I'm hoping he can be some kind of wide receiver three that makes him a viable fantasy option.
Right. As a wide receiver three, you're talking depending on how deep the league is, you're talking flex option. I'm honestly more excited
Mm,
about seeing Rashad Bateman come back from injury,
mm,
and he's
yep,
currently still going earlier, and I think that's where we see some sharp drafters right now, seeing they're taking hedging the bet that Bateman's that still that one, maybe behind Andrews. He's at 1A or B behind what Andrews is. But the offense still goes through Andrews and then Bateman and Dobbins before it goes down to, Beckham and then maybe Zay Flowers. Bateman goes about 2 rounds ahead of Beckham. But again, as late July, August hits, I could see, video clips come out. Look at what, Odell just caught this pass from Lamar Jackson deep down the sideline. And, well, yeah, that's great. But then his, value spikes and he's now not an 11th round pick. He's a 6th round pick.
Yep.
And that's where I think
Yep.
I'm just going to avoid. And if Odell ends up beating me this year, then so be it. I was wrong, but
Yep.
that's okay.
Yep.
I will hedge against that.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's probably what's gonna happen is there'll be some Twitter video going around of him doing this crazy catch and things like that, and early August, and because of the name or the brand, he's gonna jump up. But yeah, I agree with you. I think if he falls to you, it's great. He's talented. He's experienced. He could be a great asset to your team. But most likely, what's going to happen is someone in your league who's not super familiar with everyone's going to be like, oh, Odell, I remember him. He's probably good at football. And then they're going to reach for him in like the 6th or 7th round. And then, who knows?
Right. It's all about opportunity cost when you're drafting. And
Exactly.
where I think a major, not a high cost opportunity comes with drafting J.K. Dobbins this year. He is currently in late June, RB 18. He's going at the end of the 4th round, so almost the 5th round in PPR leagues. And while this team looks to be not quite so run heavy, I still think that's a pretty good value for a lead back on a team that, to me, is showing you they want to vie for one of the best offenses in the AFC, and that's a pretty tall order to have. So I think depending on your team build, there's value there to be able to have Dobbins, whether you want to go very wide receiver heavy and say, I'm just going to take a player like Dobbins coming back on a 0 RB build, or if you want to have him as an RB2, I think there's a lot of value. He was one of the best, most efficient runners in the last 3 games last year. And I know that's a very small sample size again, so we have to be very careful with how we view that. But that is, Dobbins last year was the clear avoid because of his ACL and MCL, where he didn't really feel comfortable, and he would say he didn't feel comfortable until the end of the year. And now we get him a year removed from that.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. I'm excited overall. Like, I'm excited for the Ravens in the same sentiment that we'll cover later with, I don't know, with other divisions, AFC West, for example, with the Chargers, like a new offensive coordinator. It's exciting for fantasy to hear that, right? Especially with an offense where you see potential. So I see the same thing with the Ravens. Yep. I'm excited for them. I'm glad that there's kind of a new breath of fresh air. And then they're doing the offseason moves to support that decision, which is they're bringing in talent. They're bringing in Odell, a veteran, to the locker room. And we'll see how his production is, but at the very minimum, he's coaching these guys. He's like interacting with Lamar, building chemistry with the team. I'm excited for, like I said, Rashad Bateman and Dobbins. I'm the most excited to see on the Ravens, and we'll kind of fill in the gaps here with the other teammates. But there's gonna be a lot of offense happening with this team.
Absolutely. And speaking of offense, let's go to the last team in the AFC North, and that should be the last team for this session we have. But not a whole lot of acquisitions as far as playmakers go. They brought in tight end Irv Smith from Minnesota, but the biggest, I think, acquisition is not a fantasy football player, but it's a real life football player where they signed tackle Orlando Brown, who was with the Chiefs last year. So they're trying to build up that offensive line, which has been an issue for them the past 2 years. And it really showed in the AFC Championship game where Burrow was under pressure a lot. So Cincinnati's doing exactly what Kansas City did when Kansas City went out and got destroyed by Tampa Bay in that Super Bowl run where Patrick Mahomes was under siege that year. So Cincinnati's doing what they need to, building up the offensive line. The only pieces they lost were Hayden Hurst, the tight end, and backup running back Samaje Perine.
Mm-hmm.
Initial thoughts on Cincinnati for this year?
Man, initial thoughts. We can dive into this for the remainder of our time, but Cincinnati is probably one of the most offensively packed teams that we'll go over, right? And
Right.
just reviewing all these teams. So fantasy wise, I mean, most managers are licking their lips over quarterback, running back, receivers, everything. I mean, they've got five solid playmakers at a minimum that will produce for you, that will start. I do think my initial thoughts on running back, as teams, as fantasy managers are starting to implement more wide receiver zero strategies. It'll be interesting to see where Joe Mixon lands in the mix, especially with P. Ryan gone. Um, as you probably know, P. Ryan and Mixon were running backs at Oklahoma together. They have a lot of
Yep.
chemistry. P. Ryan last season and previous seasons has come in when Mixon's been hurt or had off weeks or whatever, and cleaned up, scored tons of points. So I think with Mixon being kind of like the RB1 for the team, and we'll see how the depth chart behind him stacks up. I think Mixon is going to have another solid year. It's going to be interesting to see, though, where people draft him. That's the thing. I see 2 years ago he could have been drafted. I honestly even say like second round. It would just kind of depend. I think the biggest question is he's had some legal things too. So
Yep.
does off the field issues. So how does that factor into it? Is he drafted? Because I think with fantasy players or fantasy managers take into account suspensions. Tom Brady was 5 or 6 years ago when he got suspended for a few games. You had Deshaun Watson. I mean, Hopkins. Name any players that's last few years have been suspended.
Yep.
I can see Mixon falling quite a bit, especially with the or with a running back zero strategy. So that's kind of who I'm interested in keying on this offseason, is kind of seeing where Mixon's ADP lands. Like I said, I think what I'm really liking is, I think the 3 to 4 round is probably where he'll end up being, most likely four. I don't really see him going down to five in most leagues, because even if you're a wide receiver heavy team, you're still going to want to draft a running back of that quality and that kind of caliber of offense when you can.
Right. And right currently, I'm glad you brought Mixon because
Mm,
I have two separate thoughts on Mixon. Last year, if
mm,
you look at just his overall points scored, you look at him, and I forget what he finished at, but it looks pretty good. But
mm,
if you're a fantasy manager that had Mixon on one of your teams last year, it was not a fun ride. Because I think
yeah, no, no.
he scored the majority of his points in about two or three different games, and in one of them, it was like what, a 5 touchdown game where he just went absolutely
Yeah,
nuts.
yeah, he scored like 52 points or something crazy. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, if you faced off against him, you know exactly what that felt like because it was not a fun week for you if you faced against him that week.
yeah. That was me, unfortunately. So yeah, good times.
Yep, great times. So that's the
Yeah.
concern. But and I think legal issues. I'm glad you brought that up. Currently, I think that's kind of being baked into his ADP, and I think we are forgetting a little bit just how bumpy of a ride it was if you were a Mixon manager last year. Because currently his ADP is middle of the fourth round. So he's taken RB16. He's taken after guys like Najee. He's taken after ETN. He's taken after Kenneth Walker. So there's some value there because he is going to be the lead back on a very prolific
Hmm.
offense. He's going to get the touches. He does not. They drafted Chase Brown out of Illinois. They also drafted, I think it's Chris Evans, last year, and he also didn't see his way onto the field a whole lot. I don't see those two vying for the same amount of playing time as Samaje Perine did. So I don't see them more than handcuff options. And to me, I kind of look at the legal situation that he has going on, and our legal system and is pretty slow. So I could see this not being a this year if anything happens. Which
Mm,
if that's the case, and we'll know more by the time August hits, we're gonna know a whole lot more about what does the season outlook look like. Right now, I see Mixon as a value. I think if he starts jumping up to the beginning of the third, that's when I may start questioning: do I actually want to take him there? Um,
mm-hmm.
just because of the cautionary, tale of, well, last year, while it looks great on, depending on how you want to look at it, you know, you have to remember it came in just a handful of games. He was not that good of a running back every week in, week out. It
Mm-hmm.
was kind of a rough ride for you. So,
Yeah, and do you? Mm-hmm.
no, no, go for it.
Oh, I was just saying, like, do you think that it was a rough ride? I do agree. Do you think I'm a little bit high on Mixon, higher than I was last year because I think they're making an effort to bolster the offensive line, which I'm
Yep.
hoping means Burrow's protected more, which means that they're getting more first downs, which means they're running the ball on early. All these things that like factor into real football and fantasy football. So do you think
Right.
that I mean, do you think that Mixon has a better year than he did last year, or at least more stable? Or do you think it's going to be the same up and down, like 5 points one week, 50 the next, and then he's down to like 6 or 7 points intermittently?
I think you could have a little bit more stable. This is going to be a pretty telling year for Cincinnati as a whole. I think this is
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the last years Mixon's there. This is also the year that Cincinnati's going to have to really start looking at Joe Burrow's going to need a new contract. He's going to need to get paid, and he has definitely
Mm-hmm.
deserved that. Jamar Chase, he's about to need a new contract as well. T. Higgins is going to need a new contract. So I think Mixon could be a more steady option. um, Also, because I think he'll have a bigger potential as a workload,
Mm-hmm.
just because not having P Ryan there to be that 1B. P Ryan took a lot of work from him and even a lot of
Mm-hmm.
passing work. So I think there's opportunity for him to get there. Um, he may not be a top five, but he could be, top 12 to 15 back. And especially in the fourth round, that's where I'm like, yes, absolutely, all day long. I'll take that upside of, top either RB2, top tier of the RB2s or bottom end of the RB1s at that late position. Absolutely, I'll take that chance all day long. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so,
I agree. Good. And
yeah,
then I had one more thoughts on, or I I guess asking your questions on Cincinnati. So, we have Burrow. Where do you see him? You personally, I'm sure you've seen a lot of information projections, but where do you see him personally fall with like the top quarterback rankings? I mean, you have like the top tier. Do you see him as kind of low to the top tier? Do you see him as the start of the second? How do you value Burrow in like a single quarterback league?
so single quarterback league. Um, I kind of view him. So I think there's couple breaks in tiers. I think you have one tier where you have Mahomes and Hurts leading the way at the first
Mhm.
tier. And it's just those two. They're the clear, just that's who's there. After that, I think you can make an argument, and I would say for a tier of, I don't necessarily have them in order, or I won't say them in order, but I would say the second tier consists of Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, where they're just right. They're that second tier, right under Mahomes and Hurts, where I would take any of those. I would actually personally I would put Burrow ahead of Allen. Um,
Mhm.
because I'm a
I
little
agree.
down on Allen this year. And I know I
Mhm.
haven't covered the AFC East yet, but I'm a little down on Allen this year. Just something doesn't seem right in Buffalo, but things actually
Yeah,
seem to
he's
be
he's
still
making.
pointing up.
Mhm. Yeah,
So,
he's making mistakes, and we can cover that in that topic. But I
yeah.
think Burrow has been more stable.
Yep.
I think kind of what you mentioned. I do agree he's in that tier I would in that tier two. I would agree with you. I'd probably throw in Herbert in there too,
I can see
with a
that
new
too.
OC. I'd probably
Yep.
throw him in that there. But I agree with you. Definitely top end of tier two. I personally think a quarterback I'm probably going to aim for if I can get him because people are going to overpay for Hurts and Mahomes on brand and name. I also too am I personally don't like paying top tier or I don't pay in our early draft picks for really good quarterbacks. I kind of like the
Right.
tier two. I feel like it's a sweet spot for me. So I think that Burrow is someone that you can really aim for, someone that you can really go for that gives you a really good, top five, top six quarterback value, and you're not paying the third round, second round price that a lot of people are going to pay for Mahomes.
Yep. Nope. I agree. So one guy, I'll get your thoughts on this, and we'll head out here soon. But one guy, thoughts on drafting T Higgins this year?
Mm, T. Higgins. So, man, T. Higgins, I think right now most people have him going in the third rounds, either early third or middle third rounds. I think with so there's a lot of things that go into the Bengals offense. I personally am more on Jamar Chase for obvious reasons,
Right.
and I think he's gonna go a little higher. But I think T Higgins being what wide receiver, I think he's like 10 or 12 for the year. The projections are. I think it's a little
Currently, yeah,
high
he's about 12.
personally.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. I'm. It's personally a little high for me. I think kind of like what you mentioned. If other people, if you think if he falls to me in like the fourth or fifth round, he won't go that far. I'd probably take him. I think like your third pick with T Higgins is a little aggressive personally for me, just because I think with how the offense was structured last year, he did get a lot of touchdowns. I wasn't there's a lot of mouths to feed in that offense, and for me, burning a third round pick on a wide receiver two with a different running back situation with a new offensive line, like it's a lot of mouths to feed, and I don't know if I can justify that now. I could probably eat my own words here in about 3 months when all of a sudden he's wide receiver number one for the season. I'm sitting over here twiddling my thumbs, right? So
Right.
that's the beauty of fantasy football. That's why we play the game. But I think right now, from this side of it, third round pick for a wide receiver two on the same team is a little aggressive
Sure. And I
for
think the
me.
way
Yeah.
the path that he has to be a wide receiver one, I think that means Jamar Chase has had an injury, and then that's how we get
Yes.
T Higgins as a
Exactly.
wide receiver one. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to bet on an injury,
Mm-mm.
and especially when in the same round or a round later, I can get the wide receiver one for other offenses that they may not be quite as prolific.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather take the wide receiver one in those situations than bank on the wide receiver two. Um, so no, I agree with that because it's just a little high. I think T Higgins it's a name value
Mm-hmm.
with it's associating with an offense. So much like we've done in the past, I don't think we've quite learned that lesson or we've forgotten it as we get to um, the start of a new season. Is it's a little bit high for value. So
Mm-hmm.
because I think he's going about a round or so more or higher than he did last year. So last year I think he was like a
Mm-hmm.
fourth, maybe fifth round pick, or yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's depending on who's going around him, I think that's fine, but a little bit high
Mm-hmm.
because I think we're anticipating another high flying offense from Cincinnati, and that very well could happen. Honestly, my bold take for Cincinnati would be that Jamar Chase is going to be the wide receiver one overall, and he's going to have over 2,000 yards receiving. So
Yeah.
it's not, I'm not out on the Bengals offense at all, but I'm going to hedge my bets other places.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I think it's just with fantasy, it's all about value of the players versus where your picks are located. So to me,
Mm,
I think third round for the second receiver on a team, and when it's a prolific offense, which is why people are excited about them. But then you start getting into just okay, there's only so many pass attempts that Burrow can complete per game. How often is it going to Higgins? And as we saw last year, I think fourth or fifth round is probably a good spot for him. And again, Bengals offense, I think you're going to see that from a lot of drafts. My closing comments I have for this thing is a lot of drafts you're going to see Chiefs players, Eagles, Bills, Jets players, Bengals players. All these guys are probably going to get pushed, I would say, one full round above their ADPs, what they should be, because of their name, recent success. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is going to make the ADPs of all the Jets players go up dramatically compared to what they
Right.
were, and not just because he's a good quarterback, but just because it's Aaron Rodgers with the Jets. It's fame. There's a name associated with this brand with the team.
Yep. Well, that wraps up the North. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion we'll have and continue having. I should say that wraps up the AFC North, but I appreciate those thoughts, Grant. That's awesome. Any final thoughts as we end it for today?
Hmm. I guess a couple of things, or just one thought is for this division overall. I think that it's going to be kind of mentioned before, like two sides of a coin, two teams that have quarterbacks that are still getting the hang of things, two quarterbacks that got re-signed slash are on structured, efficient teams. It's going to be interesting to see how fantasy points are spread out because overall, all four teams generally people are excited about their offenses. So it's going to be interesting to see from a fantasy perspective. You have a lot of different quarterback situations
Mm-hmm.
here. I mean, honestly, all four. You have one that's a stable quarterback, one that just got re-signed but had some team organizational disputes, things like that. A second-year quarterback, right? And then you got Deshaun Watson, who is a veteran, right? So you have all these different
Right.
combinations of quarterbacks. It's going to be a fun year, I think, for fantasy in the AFC North, and it honestly, I think it's going to be a lot of offense. So I'm probably of the four teams fantasy wise, other than the obvious Bengal picks. Ravens are probably my favorite for just seeing what they can do with Lamar in the team. But yeah, should be a great year for the AFC North.
Yep. I think we'll be surprised when it all is all said and done. And I think this is the division that not a lot of people are talking about because when you think AFC North, you don't think high flying offense, you don't think lots of points. It's defense, it's run game, it's slow down, and I think this is where we've got some value that we can get in our drafts. But again, as we
Mm-hmm.
pay attention to how that fluctuates, we'll have to navigate if it's still value or not. But should be an exciting year for the AFC North. I think that's a division we can definitely target for our fantasy football teams. So, well, anyway, that'll do it for the AFC North preview, and we will be back for the NFC North come next week. It is good to be back. It's good to be talking about football, and we'll see you all next week.